Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching, whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. My name is Delores Mae Washington, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. But standing in the middle of Route 66 with a broken down charter bus smoking like a dragon behind me, watching two silver-haired men argue over who'd get to share my motel room that night, I realized I hadn't seen nothing yet. The desert sun beat down on my brown skin like it had a personal vendetta, and my cream-colored linen pants were sticking to my thighs in ways that made me miss my air-conditioned living room back in Detroit. Jerome, the tall Swedish man with eyes like winter ice, stood to my left, insisting he'd already paid for premium accommodations. Malik, the shorter brother with skin dark as midnight and a smile that could charm the paint off a fence, argued that age before beauty meant he deserved first dibs. Meanwhile, I just wanted a cold shower and a bed that didn't have wheels under it. The tour guide, a nervous white woman named Bethany who couldn't have been more than 35, was on her phone trying to explain to someone that yes, we really were stranded, and no, the 17 senior citizens currently fanning themselves with souvenir maps were not going to walk the remaining 40 miles to Santa Fe. I had signed up for this Golden Years adventure tour 3 months ago, right after my daughter Shanice told me I needed to get out more and stop spending every evening watching Murder, She Wrote reruns. I'd been a widow for 5 years, worked as a nurse for 43 of them, and raised 4 children who now live scattered across the country like seeds blown off a dandelion. This trip was supposed to be my grand adventure, my chance to see the Southwest before my knees gave out completely. Instead, I was about to become the center of the most awkward love triangle since Jacob got stuck between Rachel and Leah. Jerome approached me first, his khaki shorts perfectly pressed despite the heat, his cologne mixing with desert sage in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. "Mrs. Washington," he said in that formal way of his, the Swedish accent making my name sound like expensive chocolate. "I hope you'll forgive the presumption, but when Bethany mentioned the motel only has 3 rooms available for 17 people, I thought perhaps we could discuss arrangements like civilized adults." Before I could answer, Malik cut in, his Chicago accent thick as molasses, his Hawaiian shirt open just enough to show a gold chain nestled in silver chest hair. "What the man's trying to say without saying it," Malik grinned, gold tooth catching the sunlight, "is that we both been trying to get your attention since we left Phoenix, and now fate done forced the issue." I looked from one to the other, my heart doing things it had no business doing at my age, and that's when Bethany's voice cut through the desert air like a knife through butter. "Okay, everyone, listen up." Bethany's voice cracked with stress, her blonde ponytail wilting in the heat. "The nearest town is Dusty Wells, population 237. They have 1 motel, the Cactus Rose Inn. It has 3 available rooms. We need to figure out sleeping arrangements, and the tow truck won't be here until morning, so we're stuck here overnight." A murmur went through the group like wind through dry grass. Mabel and Ruth, the twin sisters from Boston, clutched their matching purses. Mr. Chin, the retired mathematics professor, started calculating room distributions on the back of a postcard. And me? I stood there remembering what my mama used to say, "Baby girl, when life backs you into a corner, sometimes the only way out is through." I had no idea that through would involve 2 men, 1 motel room, a bottle of tequila, and secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and starting over when you thought your story was already written. "Well," I heard myself say, my voice carrying across the desert like I was announcing something in church, "I guess we better figure out who's sleeping where, because I ain't about to spend the night on this bus with scorpions and rattlesnakes." Jerome and Malik looked at each other. then at me, and something passed between the three of us that felt like lightning striking twice in the same spot. Bethany's eyes went wide as understanding dawned. The other seniors started whispering, some scandalized, some envious, all of them suddenly very interested in what 72-year-old Delores Mae Washington was about to do next. The sun started its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and pink that looked like the world was on fire. And maybe it was, because something in me was burning too. Something I thought had died with my husband Harold, something I thought I'd buried along with my youth and my chances at adventure. 3 months earlier, I was sitting in my kitchen in Detroit, watching snow fall outside my window and wondering if I'd become the kind of old woman who talked to her plants because they were the only things that listened. My African violets were thriving, purple and defiant against the gray March morning, but my spirit was wilting like lettuce left out too long. The house felt too big with just me in it, every room echoing with memories of children's laughter, Harold's terrible singing in the shower, Sunday dinners that required 3 tables pushed together. Now it was just me, my violets, and a refrigerator full of Tupperware containing enough food for one person who barely felt like eating anymore. That's when my daughter Shanice came through the door without knocking, the way she always did, bringing cold air and purpose with her like weapons she wielded with love. "Mama, we need to talk," Shanice said, unwinding her scarf, purple like the violets, because she was my daughter through and through. She was 47, a corporate lawyer with her father's sharp mind and my stubborn heart. And she looked at me the way I used to look at my own mama when I was worried she was giving up on living. "You been in this house every day for 5 years except for church and the grocery store. That ain't living, that's just existing." She pulled out her laptop, setting it on my kitchen table next to my coffee mug that said "World's Best Grandma." And I knew I was about to be managed the way she managed her clients and her teenagers and everyone else who made the mistake of looking like they needed direction. Part of me wanted to resist, to tell her I was fine, but the truth was sitting in my chest like a stone. I wasn't fine. I was lonely. And loneliness at 72 feels different than loneliness at 27, because you start wondering if this is all that's left. Shanice pulled up a website, bright colors and smiling seniors doing things I couldn't imagine myself doing. Hiking, kayaking, dancing at what looked like a desert bonfire. Golden Years Adventure Tours, she read, her lawyer voice making it sound official and non-negotiable. 3 weeks through the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, professional guides, age-appropriate activities, and mama, before you say no, I already talked to your doctor, and she said your heart's strong enough for this, and maybe your spirit needs it more than your body does. The words hit me sideways, because Dr. Patterson had said something similar at my last checkup, something about depression and widows and how I needed to reconnect with joy. I dismissed it then. But looking at Shanice's face, so much hope mixed with worry, I felt something crack open inside me like an egg, something that had been waiting to break. Maybe I was tired of being careful. Maybe I was tired of treating my life like something fragile that needed protecting instead of something precious that needed living. "How much does this cost?" I asked, because I was still a practical woman who'd raised 4 kids on a nurse's salary and knew that adventure usually came with a price tag that made sensible people hesitate. Shanice smiled, victory already tasting sweet in her mouth, and named a figure that made me wince, but wasn't impossible. I had Harold's life insurance, my pension, and savings I'd been hoarding like I was preparing for 7 years of famine when really, I should have been preparing for 7 years of living. I'll split it with Kevin and Tanya and Marcus," Shanice said, naming my other children like she'd already had this conversation with them, which she probably had because that's how my children operated. They formed committees about their mama and made decisions together, which was both annoying and deeply moving. "We want you to go, Mama. We want you to remember what it feels like to be Delores, not just Grandma, not just Harold's widow, not just the woman who birthed us and raised us and sacrificed everything. Just Delores." Hearing my name like that Just Delores. It did something to me that I couldn't explain even if I tried. It had been so long since I'd thought of myself as just a person, just a woman with wants and dreams and desires that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. I looked at the laptop screen, at those smiling seniors with their hiking boots and their sun hats and their faces that said they'd found something worth smiling about again. And I thought about my mama who died at 68 without ever seeing the Grand Canyon, even though she'd always talked about it. I thought about Harold, who promised we'd travel after retirement, but died 2 years before his last day at the Ford plant. His dreams folded up with his work shirts and donated to Goodwill. I thought about all the some days I'd been collecting like rain in a bucket, waiting for the right moment to pour them out and make something grow. And suddenly, 72 didn't feel too old to start. Okay, I heard myself whisper, and then louder. Okay, baby, book it. Mama's going on an adventure. The day I boarded that charter bus in Phoenix, Arizona, I was wearing my best travel outfit, navy slacks, a white blouse with pearl buttons, and comfortable shoes that Harold would have called sensible but stylish. My suitcase was packed with enough sunscreen for 3 people and a first aid kit because 43 years of nursing had taught me that adventure and accidents were cousins who showed up to the same parties. I was nervous, excited, and trying not to think about how I was the only black woman in a group of mostly white retirees who looked like they stepped out of an LL Bean catalog. But then I saw him, Malik Jefferson, standing by the bus door with skin the color of dark coffee and a smile that said he'd been waiting his whole life for someone like me to notice him. He was maybe 70, dressed in clothes too young for his age, but wearing them with confidence that made it work. And when our eyes met, something passed between us that felt like recognition, like we'd met before in another life or another dream. "Now, ain't you a sight for sore eyes?" Malik said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. And I felt my face warm in a way that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. I was starting to think I was going to be the only brother on this whole tour. And then you walk up looking like every prayer I said this morning just got answered. I should have been offended by the forwardness, should have given him the look I used to give my teenagers when they tried to sweet talk their way out of trouble, but instead I actually laughed, and felt something in my chest loosen like a knot finally coming undone. He helped me onto the bus, his hand warm and steady on my elbow, and I caught the scent of cologne mixed with peppermint. And for just a moment, I let myself imagine what it might feel like to be seen again, not as someone's mother or grandmother, but as a woman who could still make a man forget his manners in the best way possible. I took a seat halfway back by the window and was settling in when I heard another voice, this one carrying the musical lilt of Somewhere Far From Here. "Is this seat taken, or are you saving it for someone special?" I looked up into eyes the color of a winter sky, pale blue and startling in their intensity, belonging to a man who was tall, blonde going silver, and dressed like he was headed to a country club instead of a seniors bus tour. This was Jerome Lindstrom, I'd learn later, a retired architect from Minnesota via Stockholm, Sweden, who lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago and decided to see America before he was too old to remember what he was looking at. He was Malik's opposite in every visible way, pale where Malik was dark, reserved where Malik was bold, speaking in careful sentences where Malik threw words around like confetti, but something in his eyes told me he was just as lonely, just as hungry for connection, just as tired of eating dinner alone and pretending it was fine. "Seats free," I said, moving my purse, and Jerome folded himself into the space beside me with careful precision, like everything he did was measured and intentional. Within 5 minutes, Malik had moved from his seat up front to lean over the one behind us, inserting himself into our conversation like he'd been invited, which he hadn't, but somehow it didn't matter because the three of us fell into an easy rhythm that surprised me with its comfort. Malik told stories about growing up on Chicago's South Side, running numbers for his uncle before finding Jesus and opening a barbershop that became a neighborhood institution. Jerome spoke quietly about building houses that would outlast him, about growing up in a country where winter meant 4 hours of daylight and survival meant learning to find light in darkness. And me, I told them about Detroit, about nursing, about Harold and my children and my violets. And they listened, really listened, like my life was a story worth hearing instead of just a series of duties and disappointments. By the time we reached our first stop, the Grand Canyon at sunset, something had shifted between the three of us. Something I couldn't name but could feel like electricity in the air before a storm. We stood together at the rim, three strangers becoming something else, watching the sky turn colors that had no names, and Malik put his hand on the small of my back at the same moment Jerome's fingers brushed mine, and I didn't pull away from either of them. On the bus that night, heading to our hotel in Flagstaff, Bethany announced the 3-week itinerary: national parks, historic sites, cultural landmarks. And all I could think about was how the real journey wasn't going to be through the Southwest, but through whatever was happening between me and these two men who'd somehow decided that 72-year-old Delores Mae Washington was worth competing for. I should have been scandalized, should have shut it down right there. But Harold had been dead for 5 years. My children were grown, and something in me that I thought was buried forever was waking up like a bear after a long winter, hungry, alert, and ready to live again. By week 2 of the tour, everyone on that bus knew that something was happening between me, Malik, and Jerome, and the gossip spread through our group like butter on hot cornbread. Mabel and Ruth watched us with scandalized fascination, whispering behind their hands, but never quite loud enough that I couldn't hear phrases like "at her age" or "in 2 men" and "shameless." Mr. Chin found the whole thing mathematically interesting, calculating odds and probabilities with the detachment of someone who'd spent his life working with numbers instead of messy human emotions. But Bethany, bless her heart, just looked relieved that everyone was having a good time and nobody had complained about the accommodations or demanded refunds. The truth was, I didn't know what I was doing any more than they did. All I knew was that for the first time since Harold died, I felt alive in a way that scared me and thrilled me in equal measure, and I wasn't ready to let that feeling go just because it didn't look like what 72 was supposed to look like. Malik courted me like we were teenagers in the 1960s, bringing me coffee in the morning exactly how I liked it, saving me the best seat on the bus, telling jokes that made me laugh until my sides hurt, and reminding me what joy felt like when it wasn't weighed down by responsibility. He was bold and obvious in his affection, holding my hand during hikes, wrapping his arm around my shoulders when the desert nights got cold, calling me beautiful and queen, and the best thing that happened to this old fool since he discovered Smokey Robinson in 1965. Part of me wanted to tell him to slow down, to remember we were grown people who should know better. But another part of me, the part that had been asleep for 5 years, wanted to lean into his warmth and let myself be cherished again. He reminded me of what it felt like to be chosen, to be wanted not for what I could do or provide, but just for being myself, Delores, woman and human, and maybe still a little bit magic. Jerome was different, quieter, more thoughtful, courting me through conversation and consideration rather than grand gestures and sweet words. He asked me questions about my life like my answers actually mattered. Listened to my stories about nursing like they were dissertations instead of just memories. Discussed books and music and the architecture of the missions we visited with an intensity that made me feel intelligent and valued. In the evenings, While Malik was playing cards with Mr. Chin and telling loud stories that made everyone laugh, Jerome would find me on whatever porch or patio came with that night's accommodation, and we'd sit in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one like someone was poking holes in the darkness to let the light through. He made me feel seen in a different way than Malik did, not as a woman to be won, but as a person to be understood. And both feelings filled places in me that I didn't know were empty until someone started paying attention. The tension between the two men grew as the days passed, polite on the surface but sharp underneath, like watching two roosters circle each other, trying to decide if the fight was worth it. They were never rude to each other, too much pride for that, but the competition was real and visible to anyone with eyes to see it. Malik would bring me coffee and Jerome would bring me Danish. Jerome would offer his arm to help me off the bus, and Malik would already be waiting with his hand extended. During a tour of the Alamo, they flanked me on either side like Secret Service agents, and I caught Bethany taking a picture of us with her phone, probably to show her friends later as evidence that senior citizen romance was alive and well and occasionally came in sets of 3. I should have chosen between them. Should have made it clear I wasn't the kind of woman who entertained 2 suitors at once. But the truth was, I didn't want to choose. I liked them both for different reasons, and more than that, I liked who I was becoming in their attention. Someone worth fighting for, someone who still had value beyond her ability to cook Sunday dinner and remember everyone's birthday. On our 13th day, somewhere between Carlsbad Caverns and White Sands National Park, Malik asked me straight out, "Delores, I ain't a man who plays games at 70 years old. I like you. He likes you. You clearly like both of us, or you would have shut this down by now. So what we doing here? What do you want?" I looked at him, then at Jerome, who was watching us from across the parking lot with those winter sky eyes, then down at my hands that had held dying patients and newborn babies in Harold's hand when he took his last breath. And I realized I didn't have an answer because I'd spent so long being what everyone needed me to be that I'd forgotten how to want things for myself. I don't know. I admitted, my voice small and honest in a way I hadn't been since I was young. I don't know what I want, except that I'm not ready for this to end, any of this. Malik nodded, something sad and understanding in his eyes. And that's when fate decided to make the decision for all of us by breaking down that bus in the middle of nowhere and forcing us into one motel room where all the dancing around each other would finally have to stop and we'd have to figure out what we were really doing. The Cactus Rose Inn looked exactly like its name suggested. Old, prickly, and somehow still surviving in the middle of nothing, with a kind of stubborn beauty that demanded respect. It was a single-story building painted the color of desert sand, with a neon sign that flickered between pink and purple, and a front desk run by a woman named Lupita, who looked at our group of stranded seniors like we were the most interesting thing that had happened in Dusty Wells since the mayor's wife ran off with the guitar player from the traveling rodeo show in 1987. Bethany negotiated the sleeping arrangements with the desperation of someone who knew her tour company's reputation was riding on her ability to keep 17 senior citizens alive and reasonably happy until the tow truck arrived in the morning. 3 rooms, 17 people. The math wasn't mathing, as my granddaughter would say, and everyone knew some uncomfortable bunking was about to happen, whether we liked it or not. "Okay, here's what we got," Bethany announced in the parking lot, her voice cracking with stress and heat exhaustion. "Room 1 goes to the Chin family, Mr. Chin and his brother and sister-in-law. Room 2 goes to Mabel, Ruth, and the 3 other ladies who've already said they don't mind sharing. That leaves room 3, and she paused, looking at me with an expression that was half apology and half fascination. "Mrs. Washington, Mr. Jefferson, and Mr. Lindstrom. unless someone wants to sleep on the bus with the possible scorpions I saw earlier. A silence fell over the parking lot that felt like the moment before a grenade goes off. I looked at Malik, looked at Jerome, looked at the other seniors who were watching us like we were the evening's entertainment, better than anything they'd get on their portable DVD players. And then I heard myself say words I still can't believe came out of my mouth. 1 room, 3 adults, we'll figure it out. The gas from Mabel and Ruth could have powered a wind turbine. The room was small but clean, with 2 double beds covered in matching floral bedspreads that had seen better days, a bathroom with tiles the color of mint toothpaste, and a window that looked out onto the desert where the sun was setting in a show of colors that seemed designed specifically to mock the awkwardness of our situation. Malik set down his overnight bag with the careful precision of a man trying to act natural while internally freaking out. Jerome stood by the window, hands in his pockets, his usual calm showing cracks around the edges. And me, I sat on the edge of the bed closest to the bathroom and started laughing. Deep, real laughter that came from my belly and my bones. In 5 years of being careful and appropriate and always doing what was expected, I laughed until tears ran down my face, until both men looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had, but it felt like finding it too. Y'all realize how ridiculous this is, right? I said when I could finally breathe again, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. 3 grown people old enough to collect Social Security about to share a motel room like we're in some kind of situation that nobody over 50 is supposed to be in. Malik started laughing too, his gold tooth catching the light from the bedside lamp. Jerome's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a laugh I'd seen from him, and then he was chuckling too, deep and warm, and suddenly the tension that had been choking the room like smoke cleared out, and we were just 3 people in a strange situation trying to figure out what to do next. I propose, Jerome said in his careful way, that we handle this like adults. Delores takes 1 bed, Malik and I share the other. We get some dinner, we sleep, and in the morning we continue our journey with our dignity intact. It was the sensible suggestion, the appropriate one, and I should have agreed to it immediately. But Malik, God bless his bold heart, said what I'd been thinking but hadn't had the courage to voice. Or he let the word hang in the air like a question mark made a possibility. Or we could be honest about what's been happening between the 3 of us for 2 weeks now. Or we could admit that we all like each other more than we probably should, and we're all old enough to know that life don't give you many chances at feeling something real. Or we could stop pretending that the reason we all agreed to share this room wasn't because part of us wanted to see what might happen if we finally stopped dancing around it. His words landed in the room like stones in still water, sending ripples in every direction. And I felt my heart hammer against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. Jerome turned from the window, his winter sky eyes meeting mine, and I saw in them the same hunger I felt, the same loneliness, the same desperate hope that maybe it wasn't too late to feel alive again. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I stood up, walked to the small refrigerator in the corner, pulled out the bottle of tequila I'd bought in Santa Fe as a souvenir, and said, I think we all need a drink first. The tequila burned, going down like liquid courage mixed with stupidity. But after the second shot, everything got softer around the edges. The room, my doubts, the voices in my head that sounded like my mama telling me to act my age. We sat in a small circle on the floor between the 2 beds, me in the middle, because that's where I'd somehow ended up in this whole situation anyway. Malik to my left, with his hand resting casually on my knee like it belonged there. Jerome to my right, maintaining his careful distance, but with eyes that said distance was the last thing he wanted. The desert sky outside had gone full dark, stars appearing in numbers that city folk like us never got to see. And inside our little room at the Cactus Rose Inn, three people who should have known better were about to be honest with each other for maybe the first time in their lives. Truth or truth, Malik said, because he'd already decided regular truth or dare was for children, and we needed something more direct. No more dancing, no more pretending. We each get to ask one question, and everyone answers honest, and then we figure out what we're doing here because I'm too old to waste time wondering and too young to die curious. He looked at me, then at Jerome, his expression serious in a way I hadn't seen from him before. I stripped of the jokes and the charm and the gold-toothed smile. I'll go first. Delores, why haven't you chosen between us? And don't give me that I don't know answer you gave me in Carlsbad because we both know you always know. You just don't want to say it. The question hit me like cold water, shocking and necessary. And I realized I was tired of hiding behind uncertainty when the truth was much simpler and much scarier. Because choosing means one of you leaves, and I'm not ready for either of you to leave, I said, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking around my plastic cup of tequila. Harold was my husband for 47 years. 47 years of being faithful and appropriate and exactly what a wife should be. And I loved him. God knows I loved him. But he's been gone 5 years. And in those 5 years, I haven't felt anything close to alive until I met both of you. Malik makes me laugh and feel young and reminds me I'm still a woman with desires and wants. Jerome makes me feel intelligent and valued and reminds me I'm more than just someone's mama and grandma. And maybe it's selfish and maybe it's wrong, but at 72 years old, watching my life count down like a clock running out of time, I want to feel everything I can feel while I still can. That's the truth. That's why I haven't chosen the silence after my confession felt heavy and light at the same time, like the moment before a storm breaks and the rain finally falls after weeks of waiting. Jerome spoke next, his accent thicker than usual, the way it got when he was feeling deeply. I'll ask my question to Malik since you already know my answer, Delores. I want whatever you'll give me, however you'll give it, for however long you'll let me have it. He turned to Malik, and I saw something pass between them that looked like understanding, maybe even respect. Malik, can you share? Because I think that's what she's asking without asking it. Not can we share a room for one night, but can we share her? Share this? Share whatever this becomes without ego and jealousy destroying it before it has a chance to be something? The question hung in the air like smoke, visible and impossible to ignore. And I held my breath, waiting for Malik's answer because everything, absolutely everything, depended on what he said next. Malik was quiet for a long moment, longer than I'd ever known him to be quiet. His hand still on my knee, but his eyes distant, like he was working through calculations that had nothing to do with his barbershop or his past or anything except this moment right here. Then he laughed. Not his usual big laugh, but something softer, almost sad. Man, I've been married twice. First wife left me for a preacher who said I wasn't spiritual enough. Second wife I left because she wanted me to be someone I wasn't. I'm 70 years old, got grandkids who barely call, got a barbershop I sold last year because my hands shake too much to hold the clippers steady anymore. And the only thing I got plenty of is time running out. So yeah, Jerome, I can share. Not because I want to, I'm selfish enough to want her all to myself, but because Delores deserves everything she wants. And if what she wants is both of us, then I'm man enough to figure out how to make that work. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw in his eyes something that looked like love, mixed with surrender, mixed with hope. My turn to ask a question to both of you. What happens after tonight? It was the question that mattered most, the one that transformed this from a moment of madness into something that might have a future, might have meaning beyond one night in a motel room in the middle of nowhere. I looked at Jerome, whose winter sky eyes were soft with something I was afraid to name. Looked at Malik, whose hand on my knee felt like an anchor, keeping me tethered to earth when everything else felt like flying. And I thought about my children, who wanted me to live again, about my mama who died without seeing the Grand Canyon, about Harold who I loved but who was gone, and about Delores Mae Washington, who'd been a good wife and a good mother and a good nurse and was maybe finally ready to be good to herself. "What happens?" I said slowly, tasting each word before I released it, "is that we stop pretending we're not all lonely and scared and hungry for connection. What happens is we choose each other, not instead of being appropriate or responsible, but in addition to it. What happens is we figure out how to make room in our lives for something that doesn't look like what we were taught love should look like, but feels more real than anything I've felt in years." I woke up to sunlight streaming through mint green curtains and the sound of Malik snoring like a freight train on one side of me, while Jerome slept silent as snow on the other side. And for a full minute, I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there until memory came flooding back in waves that made my face hot and my heart race in ways that had nothing to do with my blood pressure medication. We'd fallen asleep just talking, despite what Mabel and Ruth were probably imagining with their scandalized faces about life and loss and loneliness and what it meant to start over when you thought you were done starting. Nothing inappropriate had happened except the deep intimacy of three people being vulnerable with each other, sharing space and breath, and honesty in ways that felt more naked than actual nakedness. But Lord, if anyone asked me to explain how I'd ended up in bed with two men at 72 years old, I'd need more than coffee and morning prayer to find words that made sense. Malik stirred first, his eyes opening to find me watching him, and his smile was slow and warm like sunrise. "Morning, beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with sleep. "Tell me I didn't dream last night." I shook my head, my own smile surprising me with its ease. "Not a dream. More like a really strange adventure in honesty." On my other side, Jerome was awake too. I could tell by the change in his breathing, even though his eyes were still closed. And when he finally opened them and looked at me with those winter sky eyes, I saw a peace there that matched what I was feeling, like we'd all been holding our breath for weeks and finally remembered how to exhale. We lay there for a few moments, three people tangled in hotel sheets and new possibilities, before reality came knocking in the form of Bethany's voice in the parking lot announcing the tow truck had arrived and we'd be back on the road in an hour. The bus ride from Dusty Wells to Santa Fe was quieter than usual, everyone processing our overnight adventure in their own way. Mabel and Ruth kept glancing back at us with expressions that cycled through judgment, curiosity, and what might have been envy. Mr. Chin calculated something in his notebook that I suspected was the probability of three-way relationships succeeding after 70. Bethany drove with the relief of someone who'd survived a situation that could have gone much worse and was already mentally writing the story she'd tell at parties for years to come. And me, Malik, and Jerome, we sat in our usual seats, me by the window, Jerome beside me, Malik leaning over from behind. But something fundamental had shifted, like we crossed an invisible line in the desert and could never go back to being strangers who just happened to be traveling together. We were something else now, something without a name in polite society, something my children would struggle to understand. But that felt right in my bones anyway. At our lunch stop, a small Mexican restaurant in Santa Fe with the best enchiladas I'd ever tasted, Jerome brought up the practical question we'd all been avoiding. The tour ends in 5 days. We all live in different cities, Delores in Detroit, me in Minneapolis, Malik in Chicago. What then? His words fell on our table like stones, heavy with reality and the weight of logistics that romance novels never talked about but real life demanded. Malik pushed his rice around his plate, his usual confidence dimmed by the same question. I sipped my horchata and thought about my house in Detroit, too big and too quiet, and about my children who wanted me to live but might not understand this particular version of living, and about the fact that 72 years old meant I didn't have decades to figure this out. I had years if I was lucky, months if I wasn't, and time was the one thing none of us could negotiate with or charm or outsmart. I got a crazy idea, I heard myself say, surprising myself as much as them. My house in Detroit has 4 bedrooms, been empty since my kids grew up, except when they visit for holidays. Minneapolis and Chicago are both within driving distance. What if, and I'm just saying, what if we tried this for real? Not just a vacation romance that dies when reality shows up, but actually building something together that looks different than what we're used to, but works because we choose to make it work? The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I just built out of hope and fear and desperate faith. Malik's eyes went wide, his gold tooth catching the restaurant light as his smile spread. Jerome was quiet, but his hand found mine under the table, squeezing once, a yes without words. And somewhere in my chest, in the place where I'd buried dreams after Harold died, something bloomed again like my African violets defying winter, purple and defiant and stubbornly alive. "That's crazy," Malik said finally, but he was grinning. "That's absolutely crazy." "Yeah," Jerome agreed, his winter sky eyes warm. "It is. When do we start?" The phone call with Shanice happened 3 days before the tour ended, in the hotel room in Albuquerque, while Malik and Jerome went to find dinner and give me privacy to tell my daughter that her mama had somehow fallen into a relationship with not one but 2 men and was planning to move them into the family house in Detroit. I could hear traffic on Shanice's end. She was probably leaving her office, heading to her car, her mind still half on legal briefs and client calls, and I knew I was about to completely rearrange her understanding of who her mother was. "Mama, you sound different," were her first words, her lawyer instincts already sensing something had shifted. "You sound happy, like really happy. What happened on that tour?" I took a breath deep enough to reach my toes, the way I used to before giving difficult news to patients' families. And then I told her everything. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. And then Shanice's voice came back high and tight with shock. "Wait, Mama, let me make sure I'm hearing this right. You're in a relationship with 2 men at the same time, and you're planning to move them into Daddy's house? Mama, have you lost your mind?" Her voice cracked on the last words, and I heard beneath the shock something else, betrayal maybe, or fear that I was dishonoring her father's memory, or worry that her 72-year-old mother was having some kind of breakdown disguised as a midlife crisis 30 years too late. I'd known this conversation would be hard, but knowing and living through it were different things, and hearing my daughter's pain made me want to take it all back, to be the mama she knew again, the one who was predictable and appropriate and didn't do shocking things that required explanation. But I couldn't take it back, and more than that, I didn't want to. "Baby, I know this sounds crazy," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "I know this ain't what you expected when you sent me on this trip, but you told me to remember what it felt like to be Delores. Not just your mama or grandma or Harold's widow. Well, this is what it feels like. It's scary and strange and probably wrong by everyone's standards except mine. But Shanice, I'm 72 years old. Your daddy's been gone 5 years. I spent 47 years being exactly what I was supposed to be, and I was happy doing it, but he's gone and I'm still here, and I don't know how much time I got left. Now I don't want to spend what's left being careful." Silence again, and then I heard something that broke my heart. My daughter crying, soft and trying to hide it, but crying nonetheless. "I just don't want you to get hurt, Mama. I don't want these men to take advantage of you or your house or your pension. I don't want people talking about you or treating you like you're foolish. I just want you to be safe." "I know, baby," I whispered, my own eyes wet now because that's what mothers and daughters do. We cry for each other's pain even when we're the ones causing it. But safe and alive ain't always the same thing, and I've been safe for 5 years and I've been dying inside a little bit every day. These men, Malik and Jerome, they make me feel alive again. They're good men, lonely like me, scared like me, trying to figure out how to make the rest of their time matter. We ain't perfect, and this situation sure ain't conventional, but it's real, and it's mine. And I'm asking you to trust me the way I trusted you when you chose your career and your husband and your life, even when I didn't always understand your choices. More silence, and then Shanice's voice came back stronger, with the lawyer's control she used when emotions threatened to overwhelm her logic. Okay, Mama. Okay, I don't understand this, and I probably won't for a while, but you're a grown woman, and you raised me to respect people's choices even when they're different from mine. So, okay. But I'm gonna need to meet these men, and so are Kevin and Tanya and Marcus. We're not just letting strangers move into Daddy's house without meeting them first. I laughed through my tears because that was so perfectly Shanice. Unable to stop me, but determined to vet the situation like she was reviewing a merger contract. Deal, I said. Y'all can meet them when we get back to Detroit next week, and baby, thank you for trying to understand even when this makes no sense to you. We talked for another 30 minutes about logistics and concerns and her fears that I was moving too fast with men. I'd known less than a month, and I couldn't argue with her because she was right. This was fast and strange and potentially foolish, but life had taught me that safe choices weren't always right choices, and sometimes the biggest risk was not taking any risk at all. When I hung up, Malik and Jerome were back with takeout, and they knew from my face that the conversation had been hard. My daughter knows, I told them, and they both nodded because they'd known this moment was coming. She wants to meet you, wants to make sure you're not scamming her mama. Malik grinned. Well, she's gonna love my charm. Jerome looked nervous. What if they hate us? I reached for both their hands, holding tight. Then we'll deal with that together. But they're gonna have to accept that their mama ain't done living yet, and this is what living looks like for me now. The last full day of the tour was spent at White Sands National Park, and standing in the middle of all that impossible whiteness, gypsum dunes that looked like snow in the desert, stretching for miles under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. I felt like I was standing on another planet or in a dream that my mind couldn't quite process. We'd survived 3 weeks together, 17 seniors and one very stressed tour guide, and most of us were still speaking to each other, which Bethany seemed to consider a major victory. But the real journey hadn't been through the Southwest. It had been through all the walls I'd built around my heart after Harold died, walls I'd thought were permanent until Malik and Jerome showed me they were just temporary, like everything else in life, except the choice to love even when it was complicated and scary and didn't make sense to anyone else. We were taking photos, tourists doing tourist things, when Malik suddenly got serious, pulling me and Jerome aside from the group to a spot where the dunes created a natural amphitheater and our voices wouldn't carry. Listen, he said, his usual playfulness gone, replaced by something raw and honest. I need to say something before we get back to Detroit and reality hits us like a truck. I'm scared as hell. I'm 70 years old, got health problems I don't like talking about, got a past that ain't always pretty. And I'm about to move in with a woman I've known 3 weeks and share her with another man I barely know. This could blow up in all our faces. Our families might never accept it. People are gonna talk and judge and probably say terrible things, but I'd rather try this and fail than spend what's left of my life wondering what if. His voice cracked on the last words, and I saw tears in his eyes that he didn't bother hiding, and that vulnerability cracked something open in me too. Jerome spoke next, his careful, precise words, slower than usual, weighted with the importance of what he was trying to say. In Sweden, we have a concept, lagom. It means not too much, not too little, just right, balanced, moderate. I've lived my whole life trying to achieve lagom, to be balanced and appropriate and correct. But lagom is also safe, careful, And careful means you don't risk enough to really live. You just exist in a careful box where nothing hurts too much, but nothing feels too much either. Since my wife died, I've been existing in that box, calling it healing when really it was hiding. Being with you, Delores, and somehow also with you, Malik, has made me realize I don't want logam anymore. I want too much. I want to feel things deeply, even if it means I might get hurt. I want whatever time I have left to mean something more than just making it through another day. He looked at both of us, his winter sky eyes bright with unshed tears. And I knew we were all standing at the same precipice, looking down at something that could destroy us or save us, and we wouldn't know which until we jumped. My turn, I see, my voice surprising me with its strength, even though inside I was trembling like leaves in wind. I need to tell y'all something I haven't told nobody, not even my children. 3 months ago, before Shanice showed me that tour website, I'd been having thoughts that scared me, thoughts about how it would be easier to just not be here anymore, how I was tired of the loneliness and tired of pretending I was fine when I was drowning in that big empty house with nothing but memories and violets for company. I wasn't suicidal exactly, but I wasn't really living either, and the line between those two things was getting thinner every day. And then Shanice forced me onto this tour, and I met you two. And suddenly I had reasons to wake up in the morning that weren't just obligation or duty. Y'all saved my life in a way that has nothing to do with heroics and everything to do with reminding me I still matter, I'm still here, and it ain't too late to want things and have things and be happy, even if it looks different than what I thought happiness was supposed to look like. The white sand around us sparkled in the afternoon sun like diamonds scattered by a careless God, and the three of us stood there crying like fools, holding each other in the middle of all that impossible beauty, and I realized this was what I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking. Not a man to replace Harold, not a romance to make me feel young again, but connection that was real and deep and honest enough to hold all of me, the broken parts and the healing parts, and the parts that were still trying to figure out what 72 years old was supposed to mean when you still had dreams and desires and hopes that conventional wisdom said you should have outgrown. Malik kissed my forehead. Jerome squeezed my hand. And somewhere in the distance, I heard Bethany calling us back to the bus, announcing it was time to head toward Phoenix for our last night together before everyone scattered back to their separate lives. Except we weren't scattering, we were choosing each other. We were jumping off that precipice together, and whatever happened next, whether we crashed or flew, at least, we wouldn't be alone. 3 months later, the house in Detroit that had felt too big and too quiet for one person felt exactly right for 3 people who'd learned how to share space and life and love in ways that didn't follow any rule book, but somehow worked anyway. Malik had moved in first, bringing his records and his terrible taste in throw pillows and his habit of singing Smokey Robinson in the shower at 6 a.m. Jerome came 2 weeks later, bringing his books and his calm presence and his ability to fix everything I'd been meaning to fix for 5 years, but never got around to. My children had met them over a dinner that was awkward and tense at first, but slowly warmed as they realized these men genuinely cared about their mama and weren't trying to take their daddy's place, but rather make new space in a life that had room for more than just memory. Shanice was the last holdout, watching and analyzing and questioning until finally she pulled me aside and said, Mama, I still don't fully understand this, but I can't deny you're happier than I've seen you since Daddy died, so I'm trying. The neighbors talked, of course. Mrs. Henderson across the street made sure everyone on the block knew that Delores Washington was living in sin with not one but 2 men at her age. Can you imagine? And the church gossip moved through the pews like wind through wheat, whispered and shocked and scandalized. But I learned something important on that seniors bus tour through the Southwest. People's opinions about my life mattered a lot less than actually living my life in a way that felt true and real and mine. Some Sundays I went to church and held my head high, and some Sundays I stayed home with Malik and Jerome and made breakfast while we argued about whether scrambled or over easy was superior. And both versions of Sunday felt sacred in their own way. My children adjusted slowly. My grandchildren thought it was cool that Grandma had 2 boyfriends. And my old nursing friends from the hospital split down the middle, half judging, half secretly envious that I'd found something they were too afraid to reach for. Life wasn't perfect, because life never is, no matter how many people you share it with. Malik's health problems were real. Diabetes and high blood pressure that required careful monitoring and medication schedules I managed with my nursing skills, and maybe too much fussing that he complained about but secretly seemed to appreciate. Jerome struggled with depression sometimes, gray days where he couldn't find words and needed to be alone with his books and his thoughts, and I learned to give him space while still letting him know he wasn't alone in his darkness. And me, I had my moments of doubt, wondering if I was foolish, if this experiment would fall apart, if I was being selfish for wanting both of them, when conventional wisdom said I should choose one or choose neither and just grow old gracefully and quietly and alone. But then Malik would make me laugh until I couldn't breathe, or Jerome would look at me like I hung the moon, and I'd remember why I jumped off that precipice in the first place. The African violets in my kitchen window bloomed purple and defiant, thriving in ways they never had when I was alone, like even plants could feel when life was happening instead of just passing time. We established routines, Monday grocery shopping with Malik, who knew every produce manager in 3 zip codes and could negotiate discounts like he was still running his barbershop. Wednesday evening walks with Jerome, who pointed out architectural details I'd never noticed in my own neighborhood, teaching me to see beauty in familiar places. Friday game nights where we played spades and talked trash, and Malik accused Jerome of having no rhythm, no soul, while Jerome accused Malik of being incapable of subtle strategy, and I refereed their fake arguments while actually just enjoying being with 2 men who could disagree without cruelty, compete without cruelty, share without resentment. We figured out sleeping arrangements that worked for all of us, created schedules that honored everyone's needs for space and togetherness, and learned that unconventional didn't mean broken. It just meant we were writing our own rules. On the 1-year anniversary of that bus tour, we drove back to Dusty Wells, New Mexico. Just the 3 of us in Malik's Buick that he refused to trade in because it was paid off and still ran fine. The Cactus Rose Inn was still there, neon signs still flickering between pink and purple, and Lupita at the front desk remembered us immediately, her eyes lighting up with recognition and amusement. "Thr3some," she exclaimed, and we all laughed because that's what we were, though not in the scandalous way everyone assumed. We were 3 people who'd somehow become one unit, 3 separate stories that had braided together into something stronger than any of us would have been alone. We rented the same room, ate at the same small diner, and stood in the desert as the sun set in the same impossible colors, and I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, lonely, depressed, ready to give up, and the woman I'd become through choosing risk over safety, connection over isolation, unconventional love over conventional loneliness. "Thank you," I whispered to both of them, to the desert, to the universe, to whatever force had broken down that bus and forced us into one room where we'd finally been honest about what we wanted. "For giving me my life back." Malik wrapped his arm around me. Jerome took my hand. And 73-year-old Delores Mae Washington, who joined a seniors bus tour and ended up in a threesome that was actually a love story, smiled into the desert sunset and knew that her someday had finally become today, and it was more beautiful than she'd ever imagined.